It's mmorpg here, and we finally got some information about Chrono Odyssey. Kanon just released his full interview with the developer. You can find the link to that interview in the description. The interview was full of all kinds of buzzwords, but it did make the game sound too good to be true. So I thought, let's go through some of the more interesting points and talk about them. Firstly, then we're going through kind of the identity of the game, which is something I've been also kind of wondering, because a lot of the video material for the game is very small scale. So is it truly an MMORPG? The developer is still saying that it's going to be an open world action MMORPG. They're aiming to create a truly open world with the seamless exploration and no loading screens. They also kind of said they want to create like an enjoyable multiplayer experience and trying to reduce the traditional MMO fatigue, which they didn't really go in depth what that means. But I think one of my biggest pain points in the kind of a modern MMOs is exactly the constant fatigue that caused by like trying to keep up with everything and the fear of missing out. It just reaches to the point where it's so taxing and it always makes me quit the game. So I'm actually really curious how they plan on like kind of reducing that in practice, but we'll have to see and play the game. Next, they talk about how you kind of going to progress through the game, how it's going to start more of a theme park experience, and then it's going to open up more of a sandboxy later on. I personally think this is exactly the way to do it. You gotta give people kind of a hand-holding in the beginning, let them get used to all the mechanics, and then after that you give them the freedom to do whatever they want to do. Now what exactly they mean with the sandbox design, I'm not 100% sure. A lot of I've seen about the game has been very combat heavy. I haven't really seen a lot of the kind of external content you can do, which would be kind of vital for any sandbox design. But I know there's going to be crafting, there's going to be gathering, but like that's about it. I'm not sure how in-depth those mechanics going to be. Also something we have to just kind of wait and see, but I do like the way they plan on doing it, so that's always good. They also talk about how Chrono Odyssey tried to differentiate it from traditional Korean MMORPGs, which are often very heavy on the PvP-focused endgame. They tried to put the pretty heavy emphasis on PvE content, and they tried to move away from this whole tank DPS healer roles, I guess. Obviously, as someone who's more into PvP side of things, I'm okay with it. I mean, there seems to be a trend right now with the Korean MMOs. They seem to be going this kind of a more PvE focus, but with like an optional PvP, which I'm really all for. Even though I'm like a huge kind of PvP player in these games, I still would rather fight the people who actually want to fight you instead of going killing people who don't even want to PvP. I think that's just kind of boring to me. So as long as the PvP doesn't come like completely afterthought and like they just completely drop it, they don't care about it, like because there's always a chance of that happening, especially because he said that 5 to 10% of their players were like interested in PvP. I don't know, I'm not sure how they got this data, but I feel like it sounds pretty accurate, especially if you're creating a PvE focused MMO with the PvP as side content. I just don't see more than like 5 to 10% of the players actually playing the PvP content, so I guess we have to wait and see how that goes. There was some talks about the endgame content, how it's going to be a 10-player raid and 5-player dungeons. It's going to be kind of a continuous growth loops in the game. There's also going to be some single-player content, which will allow you to also grow and upgrade, which is even after you reach the end game, which is something I think we already knew that was kind of the plan. One of the biggest takeaway from this interview was the fact that they said there's no plans for daily quests in Chrono Odyssey, and they wish to avoid creating content that feels like chores to players. I absolutely hate dailies in pretty much every game I play. I just can't stand those. I'm okay with the weeklies, but I feel like dailies just create this like loop where you have to play the game every day, and I just don't want to play a game every day. So that's something I'm actually quite happy to hear, that they have no plans. It does kind of makes me question how the progression is gonna work, because the dailies are also usually there to kind of help more casual people to keep up with the game with more hardcore people. But if there's really nothing to keep up with, then there's not gonna be any need for dailies. They went through some of the gearing, how you're gonna be getting gear in the game, so seems like you're gonna be able to gear whichever way you want, like questing, field bosses, farming, crafting. I think that sounds pretty cool, like being able to gear, doing whatever. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. This game is definitely starting to sound like closer to Guild Wars 2 than any other MMORPG, really, like especially because they said that the goal at the end is going to be like horizontal progression, where you're not going to be focusing on getting more overpowered items all the time. You're going to be focusing more on getting just different combinations and then just building your character horizontally instead of like going up in power all the time, which is exactly the way they do it in Guild Wars 2. Also, they said that the game will not feature any gear downgrading or breaking when you're enhancing, which I'm sure everyone is happy whoever played a Korean MMORPG. I feel like we always so sure that the game is gonna feature that kind of mechanic, but seems like that's not the case. Gotta give them some props for that. There was also some talks about the PvP content that they plan on adding. So there's gonna be something called freely contested zones. I think these zones kind of sounded similar to me, the way it worked in Arcade, where some zones could go kind of a hostile and then you could PvP on that zone. I'm not sure if they explained it like too well how these zones actually gonna work, so I'm pretty curious to see how that's gonna work. There's also gonna be some PvE, PvP content called Eden, which is going to be tied to some character progression, and you will be able to progress through it. But again, they don't really there wasn't too many specifics how the PvP is going to work. That's going to be something we have to just kind of try out and feel. But I'm glad that there's at least 2 pieces of PvP content in the game. And it was pretty clear that this is going to be all just optional PvP content, so you don't have to do this if you don't want to PvP. So I guess it makes me wonder if the progression at the end is going to be mostly horizontal. Are you going to be wanting to PvP just for the actual play the PvP? Which is, I think it's going to come down how good the combat is. If the combat is fun, I'm all for just playing the PvP. Just give me some kind of a cosmetic reward for winning, or let me collect some heroes of my enemies and then trade them to some kind of a cool skin. That would be awesome. I really don't need the power increase from the gear or anything like that. Just give me something cool. That's my hope, I guess. There was also a bunch of talk about the monetization. I know it's been a hot topic right now on the internet, especially for this game. They said there's no pay to win. I mean, people are not gonna believe it anyway. It doesn't matter what they say. When it's a Korean MMORPG, we just assume it's gonna have pay to win. So it really doesn't matter what I say here. I hope it's not pay to win. I expect it to be pay to win, but then maybe I'm surprised by it not being pay to win. We'll see. Lastly, I found it pretty interesting that they're gonna aim simultaneous global launch. And also the post-launch updates are going to be synchronized globally. So there's not going to be this regional disparity between content and patches, which is something we usually see with the Korean games, where you're behind 6 months in the patches. So I actually really like that, because what usually happens with the Korean games, it basically fully sold when we get the patch. People have been playing the patch in the Korea for 6 months. So we have all the guides, all the videos about how to do all the content, and now we actually get to be on the same line with all the other people, which is cool. You actually can kind of go into the new content and be completely blind and just experience the content, which is pretty rare in the modern MMOs. But yeah, that's kind of all the points that I found pretty interesting on the interview. It gave us a pretty good idea how the game might actually look like when it comes out. It definitely sounds kind of too good to be true. It kind of felt like they've done the research, what the Western players want to hear, and then you just give those answers. Hopefully there are not just words and it's actually reflecting what the game is gonna be. That would be the best case scenario, but I'm still gonna be cautious because it is a Korean MMORPG. The Kakao is all involved on some level and they have a certain reputation. But ultimately, as long as gameplay loop is fun, the combat is fun, I don't really care. The game could even be pay to win, and as long as it's fun, I'm okay, I'm just gonna enjoy my time as long as the game is fun, and then I'm gonna quit it when it's not fun. I think more people should do that, because that's how you're supposed to enjoy the entertainment. But I know some people still looking for the next MMORPG they can play for 10 years, which is kind of madness. But yeah, tell me in the comments, what do you think about Chrono Odyssey? Did this interview make you more excited for the game, or are you kind of still cautious like myself? Give this video a like, subscribe to my channel if you found it helpful. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.